Among dedicated modelers of the Sherman tank, Tasca kits now produced by Asuka are highly regarded as the last word in accuracy. From a modeler's perspective, the engineering of these kits is extremely well thought out, using individual pieces where they seem to make the most sense. Compare the breakdown and resulting suspension unit of the Tasca kit with the well-known Tamiya unit. Here I've done a quick assembly of each, warts and all, so you can see how the parts actually go together right out of the box. The Tamiya unit has been with us for a long time, and its simple construction has been a favorite among modelers who just want something quick. But next to the Tasca suspension unit, you can see a distinct lack of refinement. So here are some tips that might help you make construction a little easier and take advantage of the unique subtleties of the Tasca Sherman suspension. To illustrate my assembly method, I'll be constructing a specific unit that I'm using on an M12 155mm gun motor carriage. Because Tasca has broken the suspension unit down into individual parts, it becomes possible to easily reproduce any number of unique combinations of components. Here you can see the basic features of this specific bogie assembly: straight return roller bracket, an early asymmetric support skid with solid suspension arms and later designed spring seats. The road wheels are the typical open spoke design. The first step is to remove all parts from the sprues. I like to keep everything organized so that bits don't get overlooked as I go through the assembly process. Tasca uses extremely fine spruing, so parts cleanup is minimal. But like all injection kits, you need to remove the parting line from the wheel surfaces. If you can, some sort of motorized tool works best. Assembly begins with the wheels and suspension arms. The suspension arms are keyed to the suspension bracket with the smaller diameter holes facing outward. This is important because it will determine how the wheels are oriented. With the spoked wheels, the side with the grease-fitting detail faces outward. With the solid spoked wheel, the side with the separate faceplate faces inward. Another unique feature to the Tasca suspension is that it functions similarly to the prototype. This allows for a more realistic stance over irregular terrain or when depicting weight on the vehicle. In order to achieve this working feature, Tasca supplies a thin foam pad that must be cut and layered to back up the spring assembly. While this works, I prefer to substitute a single piece of foam. Here I'm using foam found around a wad of airbrushes. Slip the spring seats over the pins in the spring assembly. Place a foam pad in one of the bogie bracket halves. Locate the spring and seat assembly into the molded track. Close this up with the other half of the bogie bracket. Check to make sure the spring assembly moves freely. Then spread the return bracket apart and insert the return roller. Open the bottom of the bogie bracket enough to slip the two suspension arm assemblies in place. Check that everything is moving freely. Then apply cement to the joint. I use a spring paper clip to keep things together while the cement takes hold. Once the cement is set, I finish down the joint. I then mark and drill the exposed return bracket mounting holes. I'm using a simple homemade guide. The measurements and construction of this guide are found on my webpage at the link found in the description of this video. Finally, the track support skid is cemented to place. Because of the uneven weight distribution, the rear of the M12 sits a little low even when empty. So assembling the suspension with foam inserts works out well to depict the prototypical stance. But if you don't need to simulate the vehicle's weight, then you could use a solid spacer. I've found that cementing 60 thousandths and 10 thousandths styrene together works out perfect to fill the space. Another alternative to fitting all the movable parts at once is to first glue up the bogie bracket with just the springs and spring seats. For some modelers, this makes it easier to finish and detail the bracket. A portion of the pins that hold the return roller and suspension arms is removed to allow them to be snapped to place later. While this approach works, I think the entire unit has more slop, so be careful not to remove too much material from the pins. Tasca also includes adapter pieces if you want to use their suspension with other manufacturers' kits. You simply cement them in place and they provide a positive location for the Tasca suspension units.